look at that list of the Wannsee Conference, you can see we're not talking about 6 million Jews. There are 11 million Jews on that list. And Hitler, after Evian, and toch gedei Reinhardt, when he starts massacring the Jews, he understands that this can really happen. This is a dream that can really be realized. We can actually destroy all the Jews. And after that list, for sure there was probably another list, Jews of America and elsewhere. And something that Rav Milston mentioned a couple of days ago was that it was a war against 11 million Jews and against every single last Jew. If that meant taking a boat to find one assimilated Jew on one Greek island, that must be done. Because you've got to find every single last Jew. And so if you look at the map on page 67, you can see that if we started yesterday talking about Operation Reinhardt and the 3 death centers of general government, of Polish Jewry, essentially, and here we now have developed 6 centers, as we mentioned already, all in Poland. We have also Majdanek, Chelmno, which was essentially for the Jews of Lodz, and Auschwitz. Auschwitz, we speak about on Sunday, was an international killing center, not just for Jews of Poland, but throughout Europe. And in Majdanek as well, Jews were brought here from all over, not just from Poland. I want to relate for a moment to the essence of Majdanek, and I want to say the following. If yesterday, standing in Treblinka, I made a statement, and I said that we're standing now in a place which represents the essence of pure evil, and that perhaps Treblinka is the most evil place on earth, that in Majdanek we're talking about a place where it's the essence of cruelty. Jews, many were sent straight to the death, but those that were brought into this camp were almost brought into a laboratory of cruelty. How do we experiment? How do we create the most sophisticated forms of cruelty? And the stories of what took place here inside this horrific place are almost impossible to tell. And you can see that another difference between Treblinka and Majdanek is the location. If on the first day, Barbarossa, the Jews were taken out into the forest and were shot, if yesterday in Treblinka we were hidden away in a forest behind 2 barbed wire fences with camouflage in between, then here we're sitting now so close to a main road. This is the main Lublin-Chelm road, highway. And we're, as Rav Milston said, we're in a suburb of Lublin. That's where we are. People were living, people were farming the perimeter of Majdanek. And I don't want to tell you what they were using as fertilizer. That's the story, that's the emes of the place we about to enter in a few minutes. A few words just to try, it's difficult to really define or explain. What is a different type of camp? So what is Majdanek? So Majdanek's a sort of combination of both a death camp and a concentration camp. 70% of those Jews that arrived in Majdanek went straight to the gas chambers. 30% were brought into the concentration camp. So what does that mean? So essentially we have three types of camps. On the one hand, we have the death centers. The extreme are those we saw yesterday. Jews got off the train straight to the death. Vizil, extermination. On the other extreme, we have the labor camps. There were more than 10,000 Nazi labor camps. More than 10,000. It could be a purpose-made camp, could be a factory where you put a barbed wire around the factory. People lived there. They were forced to work slave labor until they were shot or they were whipped and they were killed. And in fact, there was an ongoing dispute between the Wehrmacht, the German army, and the SS. The SS, when they represented, let's just kill all the Jews, the Nazi ideology. The Wehrmacht were trying to win a war. They needed the support, they needed the slave labor. It was unbelievable. It was gold bullion for the German army. Okay, to support the millions of soldiers out there trying to fight for Germany. And so we have the labor camps, which sound a lot more fun, of course they are, than extermination camps. But don't get me wrong, they were camps, they were hell. People were shot, people were tortured, people were made to work 20 hours a day, and it was a complete hell. In the middle, between those two extremes, we have a concept called a concentration camp. What is that? Well, I suppose the first concentration camps were, most of them, were established in Germany. And not only Jews, but Nazi political opposition was sent to concentration camps from 1933 and tortured and concentrated in a certain area. What do people do in concentration camps? So in the pure concentration, most of them, there weren't gas chambers. People were tortured, people died of starvation. My dad was in Buchenwald at concentration camp. It was the most hell of a place. There were no gas chambers, there was no food. Or there was a morsel. You couldn't get your hands. You couldn't smuggle food. So people were tortured and starved to death. What about work? So work in concentration camp was futile work. It was digging lumps of mud, putting them into a wheelbarrow and taking them from one end of the field to the other end. It was grabbing a boulder from a quarry and lifting it up and dragging it from one end of the quarry to the other. It was back-breaking work. There was devised to both break a person physically, but of course break a person psychologically, spiritually. And of course, again, in this sort of general idea that the Jew is not a human being, is a subhuman being, as Milton spoke about yesterday, a parasite, and that by spiritually or psychologically breaking these people, we're breaking them down, and we're clearing society of this terrible germ. We are actually cleansing the world on behalf of mankind. That's the idea of a concentration camp. So we have here in Majdanek a combination of both a death camp and a concentration camp on the outskirts in a suburb of Lublin. Lublin, by the way, were quite close to the Eastern Front, well, to the border, quite close to the border with Lithuania, with Belarusia. And so originally the idea was to turn this city into a city for the Waffen SS, okay, the elite commando unit of the German army, and bring all their families here so that when they had holidays or they had like a break, they could come here and be with their families. And throughout all the Poles, obviously the Jews are already taken care of, but the Poles as well, only the Volksdeutsch, the old Germanic folks living here, could stay here. This wasn't something that eventually ever happened, but Majdanek was originally established as a camp for prisoners of war, Russian prisoners of war, and then eventually turned into a death camp, death center, and concentration camp. Alina Birnbaum, we spoke about her a couple of times. We read her poem in Treblinka. She was deported to Majdanek from the Warsaw Ghetto. We reached Lublin late at night. The train stopped. The SS opened up the boxcars and began brutally herding out all those who were still alive and could move. Yet again the cries, the calling and the shrieking began. People were searching for each other, pulling on the clothes that discounted on the account of the heat. It was drizzling. On leaving the train, we stumbled through thick mud. The sharp chill of night penetrated to the marrow of our bones, especially after the stuffiness inside the boxcar. I was barefoot. My feet hurt as I trudged along in the crowd, being herded from the Umschlag. Had it not been for the darkness of night, the SS would have shot me on the way, as they shot all sick and frail people. We continued to march under strong armed guard to Majdanek. We trudged through the mud, stumbling and falling. On entry, we passed crowds of men in strange, striped prison uniforms, with odd striped berry on their shaven heads. They were carrying rocks, or pushing wheelbarrows full of earth, and the mud greatly hindered their labor. I wondered whether my mother and I could do such work. Please follow me.